good afternoon. Welcome back to the Ready to Lead virtual conference. I am delighted to host the next section here with you all. This power panel titled Beyond the Statement, Part 2, How to Reset and Not Retreat from Your DEI Strategy. My name is Vanessa Nazario. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Memorial Healthcare System. We're based in Hollywood, Florida. And I am delighted to be your moderator for this particular session, where I promise that we're going to engage into really thought-provoking conversations with our two phenomenal panelists, who I'll ask to introduce themselves in a minute. And I do hope that you engage with us, and as you're hearing what our discussion, that if you're compelled to ask questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. We definitely want to engage with you as well, because again, at the end of the day, as we're having these conversations, it's important for you to have your questions addressed relative to the topic at hand. And again, for you to walk away with some nuggets that you can either deploy at your place of business, or things that you can just take back and evolve as part of your DEI strategy. So enough of the preamble, let's get to the good stuff. This is why you are here today, to hear these women speak and to hear their insights relative to the topic. Because as I said, when it comes to DEI strategy, you must be firm in terms of keeping the bus moving forward and not retreating from it. I know there's a lot of noise that tends to happen when you're doing DEI. But I'm sure that, again, we'll sort of get into how to make sure that does not happen. So I'm going to start with Dr. Shaniqua Fleming, and I'm going to ask her to introduce herself first and foremost. And, a little bit about, what's your connection to DEI? How do you get into DEI and in this particular sort of world that you're in today? So you want to share a little bit with the audience who you are and your connection to DEI today.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you to the Urban League of Broward County and to you, Vanessa, for hosting this panel. And I'm super excited, Crystal, to engage in this conversation with both of you. As you heard, I'm Shaniqua Fleming, and I'm the CEO of Culture Accelerators. We are a leadership catalyst for innovation, and we help organizations really unlock the power of culture, leadership, and workforce innovation to scale impact and fast track their path, as we call it, to improving the human experience. And so your question about how, did I, find my way to DEI, so to speak, really it all, and you'll hear this probably reverberate throughout our conversation, it all comes back to culture for me, and understanding that when we talk about diversity, we talk about equity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about belonging, or we talk about anything for that matter. I am of the firm belief that culture really is the foundation and the bedrock of it all. And so there is no way to have a conversation about organizational development, organizational growth, organizational innovation, and not talk about culture. And the same is true for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So I'll give you that version for now, and I'm sure we'll get into some other things in just a bit.
I love it, and I completely agree. Culture is the bedrock, right? If you don't get the culture right, then most things will just not work within an organization. So thank you. And Crystal, same question for you. Please introduce yourself to the audience and a little bit about yourself and sort of how you got connected to DEI and this sort of world that we're discussing today.
No, sure. So thank you for having me, especially the last minute ad there, because I send everything in late. So my name is Crystal Morris. I am the founder and lead climate and culture architect for One Caring Adult. So I serve small, medium, large size organizations, from nonprofits to the National Association of Community Health Centers. But I work to cultivate emotionally intelligent leaders, because emotionally intelligent leaders will create psychological safety in organizations, and that will be able to shift mindsets in order to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion, the sense of just workplaces, trauma-informed workplaces. And how I got into this work, do you know my parents? My mom was the loudest person on our block, and she advocated for everyone's needs. So I kind of was passed down into my DNA in grade school, advocating when the teacher, I grew up in Jamaica, when teachers would use corporal punishment in humane way. More recently, I started One Caring Adult because I experienced the greatest sense of corporate trauma I've ever experienced. I didn't know it was possible to be as impacted as I was. It was the emotional, psychological, physiological impact of trauma because of marginalizations in the corporate space. And I figured someone had to say something, someone had to do something, someone had to be that squeaky wheel that was going to draw attention. And similarly to what you said, Shaniqua, it is all culture. It's not initiative, it's not innovation. It is how are we getting to the root cause, which is toxic workplace culture, and how are we informing that? And I choose to use emotional intelligence development as the vehicle, the catalyst, in order to shift culture, shift mindsets to achieve desired outcomes where we align core values and actions. So that's what got me here.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Then hopefully, that expertise, I'm sure you'll share a little bit more of sort of those experiences and how they sort of have helped you to get to where you are today in terms of guiding and having conversations with different organizations relative to this topic. And emotional intelligence, to your point, is absolutely a key ingredient, right, for any leader who is sort of stepping up and saying that they want to help an organization be inclusive and diverse and equitable, right? But it starts, I think, with the individual being fully self-aware in terms of, their own identities and what are the things that might sort of get in the way of them sort of being as open as possible to engaging with others. So thank you for sharing that. So again, we're going to get into some of the questions that we have, and the way I like to moderate conversations is really to make sure that we keep it sort of flowing. And, if there's things that sort of resonate, based on, someone's response here. So Dr. Fleming, as you're responding, Chris, if there's something there that you want to sort of expound on, please feel free to just jump in. Let's make this conversational. We're around the kitchen table now, just having a conversation among DEI peers, and really just getting into what are the things that organizations must do to keep their DEI focus moving forward, as opposed to, I think, what we've seen and what you continue to read is there were a lot of commitments, I think, initially several years ago around, organizations taking a really strong position in terms of their DEI focus, right? You don't hear too much of those strategies or anything like that, right? That noise, I like to call it, any longer. So does that mean that they've retreated? I don't know. But one of the questions I have for you, Dr. Fleming, is, in the midst of ongoing societal challenges and conversations around DEI, right, which is what we're talking about, what innovative approaches or best practices can companies implement to reset their DEI strategies and create a more inclusive workplace for all employees? And I know that's a mouthful, but it really boils down to, we know that there's a lot of, I'll call it this way. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of things sort of happening in the external world that companies obviously can't really isolate themselves from. And again, do you have sort of strategies that you've deployed to make sure that they stay focused, and if they need to reset. So what advice would you give companies who are facing those sort of challenges?
Right. So first of all, Vanessa, I really like that question. And I like that question because it highlights something that I think we need to shed light on. And that is that most organizations wait for a challenge to occur or for something to happen that's out of the norm to do what we're talking about, which is reset, right? We all know how we got here. We got here because a Black man was murdered in the streets and we saw it on national TV. I mean, and I think we have to start with the realization of how we got here. And we have to think about this in context of, we're talking about resetting, what's happening that's causing, or retreating, what's having us to have to cause to reset. So the fact is that companies and organizations come across challenges that can be classified into what I like to refer to as the 5 Ds. And those 5 Ds are disruption of their business models, digital disruption, driving growth, and right there in, all mixed in is diverse talent attraction and retention. And then there's disengagement or disconnects with stakeholders. And so relative to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or any of the 5 Ds for that matter, culture is what brings the strategy to life. So I know we're talking about strategies, but it's the organization or your company's culture that really brings the strategy to life, because it's your DNA. And culture is going to do one of two things. It's going to act as a catalyst, or it's going to be a roadblock. And so when there is misalignment in culture, there will be disengagement, there will be disconnect, and there will be gaps. And so as companies and organizations grow, and any leader that's listening in today, as you think about your growth and how you're shifting and how you're evolving, your culture needs to evolve with it. And so I would say you need to first understand the culture that you currently have, and then define the one you want. And this is how you're truly going to create inclusive workplace culture. So it really all begins with culture. And I know we're talking about what strategies, but I'd say first, understand what culture you have.
I love that. I love that. So, and listen, I completely agree. I think, we need to move from a reactive, right, sort of positioning to a proactive place, and to kind of, you already know in many cases what are the pain points, right, that are sort of being experienced by employees. And for most organizations, I think the idea of being proactive versus reactive, right, it's kind of like, well, there's nothing is really happening, everybody's happy. Are they really happy, right? How do you sort of measure for that and test for that? And there's ways you can do it, of course, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But Chris, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Fleming shares some great insights in terms of, being able to sort of take a step back and look at organizational culture as a strategy, as a foundational sort of component to resetting a company's DEI strategy. So any thoughts about what you've heard so far?
No, definitely. We're going to have a lot of synergy in this conversation. Culture, businesses, culture accelerators. I consider myself a climate and culture architect. So we're in that same space of understanding the value of culture. I will bring it back. I'm a storyteller. I will bring it back to when it's time to do spring cleaning. You don't just move things around and dust the outsides. You take all the junk out. You sort through what you're keeping, what you're donating, what you're getting rid of, so that you have a really good understanding of what's here, and then what needs to be here, what needs to leave. When it comes to resetting, I think the first strategy has to be, how accountable have we been? How open, how transparent, how vulnerable have we been? Because if we are honest, the reason why so many people put out this beautiful wordy statements, I've never seen 3-page equity or DEI statements before until George Floyd's murder. But the reason for that wasn't because it was an internal practice, an internal belief, an internal norm. It was external facing. How do we get people to feel like this is who we are? How do we get to shape public perceptions that our organization is truly believing that this was an injustice and we need to do something bigger? We need to activate our corporate social responsibility campaigns. It was never an internal process, and that's why we're having this discussion. So I think that's the first piece, just being completely honest and owning, hey, I'm a good person, wanting to do a good thing, but I didn't understand the depth of this good thing, and I thought that this was enough. And I bought into the system of checkboxes, and because of that, I've caused harm. There is no reset possible if that acknowledgement isn't made. Accountability is not an attack. For me, accountability is a love language that, hey, this is where I am. This is where I want to be over there, and I need support in getting to that space. So I definitely think just the open acknowledgement that this is where we are, doing some real good spring cleaning, and then identifying what internally do we believe in? What internally do we want to give access to for our employees and for the populations that we serve, whether it's service or a goods industry? What is it that we want to have our impact be? Who is going to hold us accountable? Which of our external, internal stakeholders are going to hold us accountable? And what are we going to be held accountable by? If you look at the majority of industries, the majority of companies that are doing this, having these statements, there's no metrics, there's no KPIs, There's nothing to track. So it's intention driven and not outcomes driven. I love to say when I'm working with clients, good intended people cause harm. Emotionally intelligent people heal. The shift in mindset has to be made.
I love that. I love that. And accountability is a love language. That's a new one for me. And definitely, when it comes to spring cleaning, I think that's something that most organizations, should definitely take a look at is, what are the things you haven't used in a while that obviously don't work. And get it out, right? You know how you like, I haven't worn this outfit in 10 years. I don't think this is ever going to fit or come. This fashion is coming back. Like, let's get rid of it because it hasn't worked. So why keep it in the closet? So it's like the same sort of philosophy with DEI. There's always these practices that, you keep throwing at, and like, for example, sometimes it's and when there's a real sort of problem that hasn't been dissected, many times, you resort to, well, let's throw a training at it and that should solve for X and everything will get back to harmonizing. And I'm like, no, that doesn't really work that way. So I love that response. And I mean, you talked about the metrics piece. So I wanted to ask for Dr. Fleming's opinion around this and some thoughts around, when we talk about DEI metrics and goals, what are your thoughts around this? I know there are companies that I think have taken a little bit more sort of robust approach in terms of making sure that they are creating, DEI metrics based on their goals to really showcase the business outcome that stems from having sort of a DEI component. But I definitely want to hear your thoughts about that, in terms of, what are you seeing? And then also, is there anything that you would sort of share with the audience in terms of things that they should be measuring? Or even how to get started in measuring if they don't know how to measure, whether it's employee engagement or any of the other DEI metrics.
Yes. So the first thing I would say is you asked maybe three great questions wrapped in that one. And I want to make an immediate plug to, if you're not able and you're not sure where to start to measure, the Urban League of Broward County has an amazing toolkit. So be sure to go to the Ready website and download that because it's going to go into great detail. But when it comes to setting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging goals, and I'm very intentional about taking my time and saying each one of the words because I think they're all distinct, and it's very important that we understand that we don't want to create a melting pot of this conversation, but is in fact a nice juicy marmalade. Mm-hmm. Each of them has its own flavor. And so when setting these DEI and these diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging goals, it's really important to take a holistic approach that really looks at a range of disparity factors in addition to demographic characteristics, as opposed to, specific targets and numbers and percentages of individuals from a particular group or class, or a number or percentage of people we're going to hire or promote, because that's where we really get into this thing where people start to say, well, aren't quotas illegal? Yeah, because if you did just that, it would be a quota. So when you're thinking about what it is you want to measure and how you actually want to, track your progress, it really starts with, again, going back to who is it that you say you want to be as an employer, as an organization, as a community partner, as whatever however you define yourself. It first begins with who do you say you are and how are you measuring up to that? And then you look internally at how are you creating a workforce that really does mirror who you say you are, and how are you creating partnerships, and how are you giving opportunities and all the things that come along with this. And so when we talk about diversity, the reality of it is we're diverse when we walk in the room. Mm-hmm. And so if we're just going to measure diversity, I mean, that becomes a real easy addition or subtraction, type of exercise. But when we talk about equity, we've got to look at systemic things that have caused there to be, the disparities that we see in the first place. And so when you're looking at what to measure and what to set as targets there, or I should say benchmarks there, it really has to be a matter of, what are the things we have in place that we really want to shift in terms of not just the number of people we have as women or Black women or Latina women or whatever it is that we say, but it really needs to get down to when it comes to this particular position. And when we look at the systemic issues that may have been caused in this particular career field, what can we do to start to shape and create a new reality as it relates to this? And a lot of times it's not going to start with your current workforce. Sometimes it's going to start with creating that pathway for those individuals to even have access, opportunity, and resources to even understand that that could be a profession. So if you're an accounting firm, for example, and typically what you've seen is a population of white men, well, just because you go out and you look for an accountant to diversify doesn't mean they're going to have the skill set. So you've got to look at the universities, and then you've got to look even further to look at the high schools to see how our kids are on track to being able to even be competitive to get into an accounting program in a college, in a university. So then there's a pathway for you. So when you're thinking about what to set, you got to think about the entire picture, and then you set opportunities and opportunity goals for yourself as it relates to where are we now and where do we want to be at a set period of time? And then you look at all of those things that have shaped you not being able to achieve that. And then you start to set yourself some intentions and outcomes that you want there. Because the intention has to be that you want to do it. The outcome is, well, what actually, occurred as a result of all the things that are either leading us to where we want to go, or they're causing us to lag behind in whatever it is that we're setting out to do.
I love that. And I heard a couple of points that I just want to make sure that I circle back to, and definitely, I think for anyone who's on this journey, whether, they're in their early stages or maturity, we definitely want to make sure that it doesn't go down that road path where people are thinking DEI metrics or quotas, right? Because quotas are sort of very dangerous. And that's definitely, the beginning of the end for any DEI strategy, because, you get challenged, right? And if those quotas are met, or if you do fill a quota, but the talent, it was not ready for that position, and there's high attrition rates, but like you see, we thought we were doing the right thing, but we couldn't retain them. So, right.
Which is why I wanted to start with that. This is not about quotas. We know that those are illegal. And so I wanted to dismiss that elephant from the conversation before it even became an issue.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And Chris, I wanted to circle back to you. I mean, just based on what Dr. Fleming has shared, sort of any reactions to this, and I do agree in terms of, you really need to start with, what is it that you're trying to solve for, right? What is the X you're trying to solve for? And Chris, before I go to you, just to give you an example, at our organization, we're a healthcare system, we have a huge need for talent in all areas, right? And when we look at specifically our physicians population and the diversity there's definitely an opportunity to continue to build that talent pipeline. But we know that, it starts with even getting out to the high schools early on, and sort of, showcasing people that look like them, who have gone through the path of going through medical school and really being inspirational. And I'm all about representation does matter, right? If you see it, you can be it. And helping, these youth sort of navigate. So, I mean, we're going out, we're like casting that net and planting those seeds because we must, because we already see where the gaps are going to be relative to specialties like cardiology and right, in terms of Black women being cardiologies, Black men. So all right, so what are we doing to shift that? Because if we, stay doing what we're doing today, we're not going to have the beautiful diversity, and so anyway, but Chris, I want to turn to you and have you sort of chime in and on your thoughts around the conversation.
So first I want to say it's raining here, and I saw the message that said unstable internet. So hopefully that won't impact me much. But I love that quote that says, don't make decisions for us without us. So when we're looking at metrics, and even with identifying what the problem is, I'm always curious who's at the table with saying and defining the problem. Because my perspective about an issue could be completely different from someone else's. And if we don't have a diverse, not just in terms of race and ethnicity, but in terms of lived expertise, I don't consider it lived experience, because you can have zero education under your belt and have more awareness and insight than the person with the PhD, right? So it's the lived expertise of individuals, the backgrounds, all of it has to be factored in when we're identifying what the problem is that we're trying to solve. I talk about a lot that you have your core values and you have your actions, and they don't always align. And the reason they don't align is it's informed by your belief systems. Your core action, your core values don't drive your behaviors. It is your understanding of the issues, your beliefs around the issues. And that was from a great book, The Waymaker, by Tara J. Franks, I believe her name is, it's in the book behind me somewhere. But she talks about the fact that whatever you believe about an issue, that will shape your values. So if you believe everyone is equal, everyone has equal rights, your metrics are going to reflect that. You don't have to account for anything. You don't have to ask questions. You don't have to hold yourself accountable to anything. Why? Because you've already achieved that thing. Mm-hmm. But if you're understanding, if your reality is there is a lack of equity, there is a void of equality that exists, now you are going to track that data. You're going to constantly reassess that data. You're going to be intentional about trying to make restitute or restoration for that issue. So it's always starting with making sure that at the table, while we're identifying the core problems, that we have stakeholders from every representation there. Stakeholders has been, I think, co-opted as the people that are making the money, the boards, all of those people. But your stakeholders, if we're looking at the healthcare space, that is your patients. That's their family members. Those are the community centers, the CHWs, the community health workers. All of them are your stakeholder populations. Some of the metrics that I think should be specifically looked at is, where are we sending our job postings? If you're looking at it from these corporate spaces, are you intentionally going into communities that are different from the pools that you've traditionally gone to? So if you're only looking at Indeed.com or Glassdoor.com, you're only getting a certain demographic of individuals cast a wider net. Who's making the decisions to bring these people in? If it's always the same people with the same mindsets, guess what? Affinity bias is going to kick in, and you're going to get the same people that are going to be the fit for the company. So you won't be able to measure, or the data that you're getting is already going to be skewed. So identifying those key pieces are just two of the metrics that you should track. The third one, because I'm cognizant of time, is, are we measuring trust? Something so simple, but it is the bedrock of all of this. I think we've questioned and surveyed and interviewed our staff ad nauseum. And for a lot of those staff members, they see the same questions year after year with zero shift in culture, in climate, in practices and policies. And we have it in black and white that this is who we are, but the norms that are present are completely opposite, in contradiction to what is in black and white. So we're not truly measuring the trust so that we can move from low trust to medium trust to high trust. All of our other data that we're collecting is for naught if we don't have team members that fully trust that we are well-intended, but also driven by positive outcomes to cause change and to build a sense of psychological safety within the organizations. Not just DEI, but truly equitable, inclusive spaces with diverse representations that produces a just workplace.
I love it. And there was so much in that response that I have to figure out, which piece I want to pull out and sort of, run that thread a little bit more.
Vanessa, if I could, before
please go ahead.
I just want to make sure, because this question is a weighty question, in that, a lot of people will discount, count out, or this is why I believe organizations, and what I've seen causes an organization to retreat. And I think that, what Crystal and I have been talking about are certainly the pieces that many executives will say, we don't have time to really focus on that. And we can make an argument all day long, both of us could, in terms of why culture is important. And this is where I think we also have to bring in this element of, when we talk about metrics and we talk about measurement, this is, now we're at this point, we've been on this journey with Ready for, a couple of years now. And so we're talking about people retreating, and now we're needing to reset. I think there has to be an emphasis that we place on this question about regularly evaluating goals and metrics to ensure that they align with the changing needs. And alignment is so important because it goes back to the culture you want and the one you actually have, but there has to be some alignment to make sure that what you say it is that you want to do, that you actually have a way to measure that. And everything can be measured. Every single thing that we do in organizations can be measured, including trust. And so to make sure that it aligns with the changing needs and the expectations of people, of your clients, of your customers, and of your stakeholders, as you've mentioned. And so just really quick on that, you know, as someone that became an executive at a really young age, I was really blessed to work for organizations that, for all intents and purposes, were very inclusive. And I still spent years wondering if I really had what it took to be successful, if I belonged in those roles. And I don't want to focus so much on the mindset of that, but I want to focus on what was actually saying that that organization was inclusive or not. Like, what were those metrics? And so I want to challenge leaders that are on this conference today to really identify, how are you measuring that? What is your key performance indicator that you are enveloping trust, that you are doing these things? What are those milestone goals that you're setting in terms of, you know, we're here now and we want to be here in terms of, you know, the strides we make in a year. And so make sure that it's measurable, and we don't walk away from this question thinking that it's about, you know, just the qualitative part of measurement. But I really want us to put our weight on it with the quantitative, because I will tell you, anything that's stressing or supporting your bottom line, you'll pay attention to that. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just the right thing to do, it's the profitable thing to do. And I think sometimes that is the thing that we don't want to talk about. So I want to just make sure we don't miss that.
Yeah, no, and that's important. I'm glad you sort of circle back on that, because, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion absolutely can create really meaningful, substantial business impact. I think where people tend to struggle is you can create lofty goals, but the follow through and the follow up on, you know, how to really measure, right? And I know we keep, you know, we've used the word trust a number of times, you know, psychological safety, the people so safe at work. So I think, you know, maybe if whether Crystal or you, Dr. Fleming, you want to share, you know, maybe one way that can be measured. I think it'll be helpful for, you know, the leaders on this call or business owners who are like, well, how do I measure trust? You know, how does that show up in my organization? I need help with that. Please help. So whoever wants to sort of, you know, add and respond to that.
Sure.
So I know you said we want to be heavy on quantitative, but for me, this is what I use to measure trust. It's that qualitative data. What are the narratives that are coming out from your teams, from your direct reports, from just all your stakeholder populations, not just internally, but externally as well? I can get data to say whatever I want to say. It's easy to skew and manipulate how this percentage is shown. So I can get 85% of people to say yes to something and not tell you that I only interviewed 4 people, right? So I can get numbers to reflect a very flowery picture, but what I can't get is that review on glassdoor.com that says the worst place to work, never apply there. I can't fix that. There's no amount of Febreze that can change that. So those are the key pieces that I look to. What are your teams saying about you? What is the public perception about your organization? I've worked with companies, and when I talk to people in the community that nonprofit is occupying that space, the first thing I was told was, wait, they hire Black folks? I didn't know that. That's the public perception, and perception drives reality. And as a person of color, as a Black person in that community, they would never seek out services there, because in their mind, they don't hire people that look like me. I need to get culturally responsive care. I'm looking for a practitioner, for a clinician that looks like me. This is important to me. If that's the narrative that's out there, you will lose a complete sector of a population. So for me, it is looking at what are the stories that exist that form the reality, be it based on truth or based on perceptions, but what are those stories that exist How am I understanding what is driving that thing? And then what can I do internally to make the shifts, to create public awareness campaigns, to engage? Again, don't make decisions for me without me. How can I bring these stakeholders into the table so that we can co-create something meaningful? Because when I shift power, or when I completely give over power, not just necessarily power sharing, but when I give and transfer power to people that feel marginalized and disempowered, trust starts coming up. When you can see your fingerprint, oh, they heard me in my questionnaire, they heard me in that listening tour, they heard my opinions, and now I'm seeing it in policy and in practice, and now it's becoming the culture's norm. Trust is the byproduct of that, but we have to give not just an opportunity for people to share and to have that qualitative data. We have to show them, this is what you said. I took the chart papers off the wall from your gallery walk. I went back, we disaggregated that data, and we made noticeable and significant shifts towards bringing about the new normal that you so desire. That's when we'll start not only measuring, but seeing trust grow.
Yeah, and I think, there's definitely, the qualitative plays a pretty substantial role. Absolutely, the power of storytelling and actually listening to your employees in terms of what are their pain points and what are the things that, they're thinking about and thinking of as it relates to their employment within an organization. I do also think that, but you have to work at that, right? Because they have to trust that they have a safe space to share these things, because retaliation is a real thing. And being sort of labeled, right, as a noisemaker, troublemaker, and you've seen it in some companies where someone, comes in with a really sort of from a good place, a good heart, and they raise concerns. All of a sudden they're, oh, well, you got to be careful because, you can't say certain things around that person because they get all. So I think you really have to work at it in terms of creating an environment where those conversations can happen, and that the ideas, right, that are sort of generated among those peers are taking to that next step in terms of, what are the things that actually can be deployed. But I also think, again, that that's where leaders also must be, the change makers. They're the ones that also have to sort of set this tone at the top of the house, where their heart and head is around this, and sort of, lead by example. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about that in terms of, a leader's role in sort of resetting DEI strategies and keeping a business sort of laser focused on their objectives. I know, there's always all these competing things that are happening within an organization, and healthcare is no different. We just went through COVID, and there's still a little bit, and there's always something going on, but at the end of the day, you have to keep leaders engaged in your DEI strategy and keep them laser focused. So I wanted to hear maybe Dr. Fleming from you, what are the suggestions you might have to sort of keep leaders engaged and sort of laser focus on continuing to fostering an inclusive environment, just based on what we just shared, right? We talked about culture, we talked about trust, we talked about making sure you're inviting the right stakeholders around that table to sort of share, what's really happening. The numbers say this, but let me tell you what's really going on. So maybe you could share a little bit about, the roles that leaders play in kind of like harnessing everything we're talking about.
Sure. So I guess it's a very simple thing for me. Systemic, sustainable, scalable, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategies call for us as leaders to first and foremost locate ourselves in the work. And what I mean by locate ourselves in the work, it's kind of like how you started this conversation. What brought us to this work, right? And some of us were brought to this work because the work found us, meaning that as Crystal said, from her parents, right? We can talk about our story of, it being a part of my family legacy, but more importantly, personally, what does this work mean for me as a leader? Where do I stand in terms of my biases or my lack of trust in certain things, or my experiences that have caused me to either connect or disconnect? And so once we've been able to do that, then and only then can we embody empathy, compassion, and understanding. And that's what it's really going to take for us to lean into those hard to reach places, if you will, keeping with the cleaning analogy, of inequity to widen the doors of access. And we want to widen those doors, not just for the sake of opening them, but opening them for resources and making sure there's support, and that wherever there are disparity gaps and where there is a need for greater diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, we're actually going in. And that's why the measurement is so important. Yes, the qualitative and the quantitative, because every single thing, as I said, can be measured. And so when we create core values for our organizations, let's not have them just be, nice placards on the wall, but let's translate those core values into guiding principles and core competencies. And if we took, for example, a listening tour, well, how many listening tours do we have? How often do we have them? How many actions do we take as a result of that? And so that's where leadership comes in. And so from a leadership perspective, how are we creating more cross-functional teams so that we understand needs that we may not always see because we're working in our silos? And so the leadership really requires that ability to be a future-focused leader that can see around corners of diversity, equity, and inclusion to see where those disparities lie, so that we know what doors aren't open and we know what resources and we know where there needs to be access.
Perfect. Thank
If I
you.
can
Yep,
chime in.
and I was going to turn to you, Crystal. You want to add to that? Reactions?
Yeah, just two big things. I need to start taking notes so I don't forget. The one that was top of mind for me. Okay, there we go. I got both of them back. What does success mean to you? And I found that to be my favorite question to ask, because when I go around and I ask people to write down what does success mean to them, I get, if it's 15 different people in the room, 13 different responses. And if we're all working towards different visions, then guess what? We'll never have consensus. And I see that a lot, that leaders take on this balcony perspective, where to them, success means that our strategic plan said we need to have 3 workshops per year, and we have to have 85% of this. And we've gotten the 3%, or we've gotten the 3 workshops and we've gotten the 85%, we've gotten 87%. And to them, that is successful. While when you look at the qualitative narratives, the stories, nothing shifts. All we've had is check boxes. So I think a leader truly has to get into the habit of not only communicating what success means, but getting an understanding of, see, all of your stakeholder populations, what is success meaning for them? And then bringing it all together to have some consensus workshopping, to have one singular vision. But the split vision will never be, we're going to constantly hit reset if we have a split vision. The second thing that I would throw in there for leaders to do is to, and I'm not saying they have to become a subject matter expert, but they have to be informed. Again, leaders tend to take on this balcony perspective. So when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusions, when it comes to soft skills, because that is how it's perceived, they're more focused on the operational sides of things. How are we balancing the budget? Are we being fiduciary responsible? Are we taking care of the stakeholders that are on the board of directors, but not seeing how these human skills are adding to our retention? You said it earlier, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is profitable. Without it, we are going to have substantial bleeds. That is what partially fueled the Great Resignation. So our leaders not only have to make the budgetary investments, but they have to make the scholarly investments. This is as much their learning, so that they not only have awareness, we have to move beyond awareness. Awareness is not good enough. Awareness matters, but it is not the goal. So how are they growing in awareness of this is the problem that exists globally? How are they aware of the impact that it's having on their teams? And now how are they moving into the space of advocacy, where they are now saying the ouches for their team? I shouldn't have to stand up with the shield because my leader, not manager, not boss, but my leader is stepping in front of me and taking those hits and advocating on my behalf. That's the direction that leaders have to go when it comes to this movement, this need, not only because it is what is beneficial for their bottom line, but it's what's best what's right and what's just.
Absolutely. And that's how you really make sure that, you start to sort of move this forward in a really powerful way, right? And sort of see the results that you're aiming for when you
It's
sort of
sustainable.
follow it. But yeah, absolutely. So let's say we have the leaders engaged, everybody's aligned, we've started to build trust. Let's think about sort of from an external perspective and, what are the things that companies can sort of employ as it relates to making sure that their brand, right, and their messaging really connects back their what they're doing relative to DEI back to that customer base, right, in a really authentic manner. I think, you've probably seen and heard different attempts at that, which has not gone well. And, you always want to make sure that any messaging that you're putting out there relative to commitment to DEI is coming from a place of authenticity, that it's backed up with sort of realness in terms of what you're actually doing within your organization. So again, I just wanted to hear maybe a number of strategies that you would offer up for organizations to consider deploying to make sure that, again, that their brand voice is coming across truly authentic in terms of their DEI journey. So Dr. Fleming, I'll start with you. What advice would you have just to make sure that brand voice doesn't come across as as just vacant, right? There's nothing there. What would you say? And then I'll come back to Crystal.
So first of all, it's important for us to, every now and then just level set in the conversation. This is not about perfection. There's no perfect organization, and perfection is not the goal. And so no company or no organization is going to be perfect. But we also don't want to create brand reputations of being performative, right? And so I love this question so much, Vanessa, because this is one where walking the talk is not just a cliche, but I'm going to make it a direct call to action today, right? Let's walk the talk, right? So performative measures and publicity stunts, people see those. They see them before we even know what they're, and they don't always know like what's not there, but they know something is missing. And so just be honest. You talk about what strategy is simple, just be honest. And one of the things that I would encourage every company, every organization that's represented here or that will hear this, is to be honest about where you are and take people on your journey of progress. Like curate the experience, because it's really going to serve a couple benefits. One, it allows you to share and help create an ecosystem of companies and organizations that are on this journey with you, and you're learning from each other and you're sharing. And you also are able to see, just where there are some best practices, and you also will see some of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging fails that are happening along the way. So it doesn't have to become, a public just fiasco, right? We don't want that. And I think we saw a lot of that when we kicked off this whole Ready campaign, where there were several CEOs from around South Florida that made a commitment early on and really were super transparent about where their companies and organizations were, and really have been doing a great job of telling the story of how it's going. And so I think that's a strategy that honestly, you don't even have to overthink it. You literally share where you are, and you bring people along so they see your growth. And so then it takes care of what Crystal was talking about. Maybe that company or that organization that wasn't the greatest place to work for, you literally get to see how they are owning that, and they are now taking those proactive measures to create, in fact, the environment, the culture, the workplace, the type of outcomes that they want, and you get to do it with them.
Absolutely. So being honest, right, about, your starting points. And I know that might sound a bit daunting for some, right? Because it goes back to that spring cleaning conversation we had earlier. Do you really want to know what's in my closet from 1985? It's one of those things where, it's you really have to, I guess, get to a place of being comfortable with understanding that, and to your earlier point, that you're not really seeking perfection at the end of the day, right? It's one of those things where you sort of self-admit that you're starting from a place where maybe there's a lot of work to be done, right? And that's okay, and to be transparent. So Crystal, I want to hear your thoughts around this question as well, and your reactions.
I don't have that much more to say. I completely agree that that's the only response I have is transparency. And we talked about it earlier. How do you build trust? It is that being able to be transparent. Using my spring cleaning analogy, I will bring my best friend over in the midst of spring cleaning. But if I just met you and I don't have a relationship with you, then you're not going to come to my house unless I called in the cleaning service. Because I have 3 kids and they're slobs. And that's the reality. No one wants to be seen in their worst light because that will shape the impressions that people have of you. But when you have a relationship with someone, doesn't matter if it's good or it's bad, you know that that person is going to love you, is going to stick with you. Their commitment is not going to change because you don't have your stuff together. When I see the 3-page DEI statements, and when I see the beautifully narrated and edited photoshopped videos that come out with companies' commitment to DEI, I can tell it's performative. Because if it was real, you would tell me that you've lost how many team members. You would tell me how many of your board members left because this is not in their ideology and they're wanting to separate themselves from you because you're too whatever it is. You would tell me that this hurts because it is supposed to hurt. It's just like childbirth. You don't get off the operating table, you don't get off the delivery table because you're having contractions and you're 10 centimeters dilated. You lean in and you push. And you don't get to get off the table when DEI stuff gets hard. You reset, you push, but you have to be transparent in communicating this. And I will own that we as consumers and as the public have a role in that as well. We have to make the shift from cultural competency to cultural humility. Cultural competency says you've done the training, you should know this stuff. If you don't know it, it's a slap on the hand, or worse, we cancel you completely and there's no redemption, there's no restoration. Cultural humility is fostered around the sense of relationship and connection. So when you do fall, I call you back in because we have community. And I say, hey, you're a jerk for what you just did. This is the impact of that thing. Now, what are you going to do? How can we work together to make this right? That only happens if we're going to be transparent. That's where that authenticity piece comes, when there's safety in knowing. Psychological safety is not just for the employee, it's for the employer. There has to be safety in knowing if I make this mistake, you won't leave, you will come in and you will work with. Or better yet, you will call an external consultant, and that's why we do what we do, to come in and to partner with so we can have healing and restoration happen.
I love that. And and maybe let's just, and I know, time is definitely coming to a close. But before I go to the next sort of point here, I want to make sure, participants, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. We definitely wanted to give space for those who had questions or reactions to what you're hearing today. So please do so. We only have several more minutes to go before we have to conclude this really powerful conversation. But I wanted to go back to, the culture humility and sort of the training aspect of what you just said, Crystal. Because I talked about it a little earlier, and in many cases when you hear sort of DEI strategies, right? And we talked about the business aspect of this and how impactful it can be. But in many cases, many organizations and leaders, when they think of DEI, they think it's just training, right? Just training. You talked about cultural humility versus, sort of cultural, I forget the word they use.
Competence.
Yeah, because but you see that a lot. So talk a little bit about that, or maybe Dr. Fleming, if you have sort of reactions to that, because I hear that quite often. Oh, there's a problem going on here. With this particular team, let's throw some training at it, right? And hopefully that, that competence training will sort of cure it all. What are your reactions to something like that in terms of, just using training and that, or should it be more transformational around cultural humility? And, but anyway, I wanted to give you the space, Dr. Fleming, to react to that.
Sure, certainly more transformational. And I think, I make a distinction, IQ is the thing that gets you in the door. EQ is the thing that helps you move around, build relationships. and create something that you maybe never thought you'd see before. And so when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and you talk about culture, it's really, and you know, in our company, we refer to it more as learning and discovery, right? Because it's more of opening up the window of what's unknown to both you and others, right? And I want to look at this on the more macro level, because I know we've been talking about leadership in the micro level, but the macro level of it is, where does your organization have the opportunity to really go deeper as it relates to how are you truly leveraging the fact that you are diverse? Where are you truly identifying your gaps of equity? Where is there opportunity, and how are you leveraging and harnessing inclusion to fuel things like innovation and new ways of getting things done? And then the belonging part is it an environment where everyone feels like they have the opportunity to contribute to that, right? And so when you think about training and development, you know, one could say it's potato, but training says, okay, there's a 1, 2, 3 step, and we're really going to follow this, and there's only one outcome, right? And if not, there's a right and wrong answer. What we're talking about when we're saying let's cultivate this inclusive workplace is more of, it's more of a framework, right? And so it's a discovery, and it's going to yield things that we don't like sometimes, because those are the things that we expose as our weaknesses as an organization or as an individual, but it's also going to show us our opportunities. And so when we think about how to really, really harness this, it's looking at those steep drivers that are everywhere, because they're going to inform what happens whether we want them to or not. And they're social, they're technological, they're environmental, they're economic, and they're political. And in those drivers, we don't want to talk about those things because they're uncomfortable, but the reality of it is they create trends, and those trends create outcomes, and those outcomes create realities that, you know, we've been talking about, and those realities create the workplace culture that we're talking about, trying to make more inclusive and more diverse, and one where people know and feel they belong. And so when it comes to, you know, the cultural awareness, the reality of it is, it's not about everyone having the same experiences, because we don't. We all can have the same experience and make meaning of it very differently. So it really has to be a commitment to opening up the environment to learning and discovery.
I love it. You just gave us a whole blueprint that hopefully, you know, those who are on the line have taken a note of, and I know this is being recorded. But I want to thank you both, Crystal and Dr. Fleming, for the amazing time we've had. Oh, no, go ahead. Yep. I know you're leading the next conversation, so I want to be gracious and give you some time back.
They're fine. To the question that you asked of training, I think it was a question that has to be amplified. I'm not saying training is bad.
Yeah.
Intention versus outcome. If your intention is to stop an issue, or to say that you've addressed an issue, I should say, not stop an issue. But if your intention is something happened and we have to show that we did something, training, and that's where you need to stop. If your intention is to change what happened and to get actual outcomes that are going to transform your culture, to create safety, to do what is right, more than training is required. And I think good intentions are what's driving this mass influx of trainings. And we as practitioners, we love it because we get paid, but we hate it because nothing is going to happen. The most frustrating thing is just doing a training and ending. But remember, it is outcomes driven. And if it's outcomes driven, focus on your relationships. That can't be achieved in a 60-minute training. That is something you do after the trainers have left the building.
I love it. Drop the microphone. It's all about that intention and what you're looking to cause relative to having the training conversation. So again, thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Dr. Fleming. And I want to thank the attendees for being a part of this panel today and listening into all the golden nuggets that were shared. I do hope you've taken some good thoughts back that can be deployed at your respective organizations. And I remind you now, to return back to the Ready platform for the next breakout session, which is actually going to be led by Crystal, Emotionally Effective Leadership. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, au revoir, and on to the next one. Thank you, Urban League, for inviting me to moderate this panel. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Be well. Bye now.